Hello and welcome to this download from Blackwell Online. My name is George Miller, and my guest today is Gary Marcus, author of Kluge, The Haphazard Construction of the Human Mind. Gary is an evolutionary psychologist who has been looking at how the way in which the human mind evolved is sometimes less than ideally suited for the demands of modern life. When I spoke to him on the line from his home in New York, I asked him to start by explaining what exactly a kludge is.
A kludge is an old engineer's word for a clumsy or inelegant solution to a problem. Something that gets the job done, but it's not necessarily the ideal way of making things. You could think of MacGyver, think of duct tape and rubber bands. You get it done, but it's not pretty.
And then when it comes to the human brain, tell me how it applies to that.
Well, the human brain is a product of evolution. And although a lot of people think of evolution as making the best thing you can imagine, evolution really is a kludge maker. It just makes whatever works. If something works better than what comes before, that's great. But evolution can't look ahead and say, well, if we started from scratch, we'd be better off with bones of steel. Evolution just fiddles with what's already there, and sometimes the solutions it winds up with are kind of clumsy. So I can give you examples, for instance, about how our memory works, where we have a system that works, but it doesn't work very well. We forget things all the time. We can't remember where we put our car or where we put our keys. Computer memory would be much more efficient. What we have is kind of clumsy. It's not really very good at remembering specific things. It's just good at remembering general tendencies. And that was fine for many of our ancestors, but it doesn't really work in modern life.
And so, I mean, it's quite helpful perhaps to think about the circumstances or the evolutionary conditions in which our brains did evolve. I mean, what does that tell us if we think about, how our ancestors lived and what their priorities were for understanding how our brains function today?
Well, a lot of evolutionary psychologists think about the time of the Stone Age, and they say, well, in the Pleistocene era, we needed to do this thing or that thing. And certainly part of our evolutionary heritage is the kind of Stone Age, living in caves or what have you, living in the savannah. But really, the evolution of the human being can be traced all the way back to bacteria. We have sort of 1 billion years of evolutionary baggage. And some things, change in evolution relatively quickly, but mostly evolution is a slow, cumulative process. And so the basic organization of our brain, for example, isn't that different from the basic organization of, say, a brain of a chicken, even though we don't live our lives anything like the way the chickens live their lives.
And you write in the book that most of us are reasonably comfortable now with the idea that our bodies are evolved but imperfect. You write particularly about the spine, being not ideal for walking upright. But you say that, on the other hand, we're less comfortable with the idea that our brains might have these inbuilt systemic imperfections. Why do you think that is?
I think that's right. So first, maybe it's worth explaining briefly to your listeners what I mean by the spine example. So the human spine is a pretty poor adaptation to standing upright. It works. It allows us to be upright, but people have back pain all the time. And the reason is that we have a single column supporting all our body weight. And that design, as it were, it's not really a design, but that structure is a small modification of something that happened in the billion years of evolution before, at least 100 million years of evolution before, which is we evolved from four-legged creatures that have a single column to support their body weight. But in those creatures, it's horizontal rather than vertical. So they have something like a picnic bench supporting all their weight, and a picnic bench is a fine, stable structure. But for us, it's tilted up 90 degrees, so it's like a flagpole. And you don't want a flagpole to support a big, heavy body. You want it to support, a thin piece of fabric that sways in the breeze. So it's a very clumsy design for us. And most people would accept that fact. They would say, yeah, the human spine would probably be better. And you could think of, it's a fun exercise to think, well, if you were a modern engineer, how would you build a vertical creature? And you might use, let's say, 3 columns, like a tripod, or 4 columns and shock absorbers. There's lots of options that evolution just never hit upon. So people are fine with that. They say, yeah, my back hurts. But there's a kind of pride when it comes to our minds. I mean, first of all, we always try to separate ourselves from other animals. We want to say, humans are special, and in some ways we are, but we have a lot of continuity, a lot of connection with other species. And the more we sort of try to separate ourselves, the more I think we're not open to thinking that, well, we have sort of warts and all, just like every other creature.
You talk about various aspects of human behavior and how the kludge affects them. And I was interested particularly in what you say about our beliefs, how we often go from the conclusion back to the premises, and we are very reliant on perception and what we may be told or what we may read. And you relate that to the kludge effect in how we grapple with the world.
it's really amazing that human beings can do things like scientific reasoning. I don't just mean like reasoning about chemicals, but just thinking about data and what it means. So we could be talking about the behavior of a friend or a boss or something like that. We're pretty good at analyzing the data around us, but we have some systematic flaws in how we do that. One of them is that what we want to be true often interferes with what we might logically reason about. So if you tell a smoker that smoking is bad for your health, they might tell you things like, well, but other things are bad for my health too, which is actually irrelevant. Or they might say, but I don't smoke that much, so it won't be a problem for me. People can come up with sort of weird self-justifications and so forth because emotion is somehow sort of tied in with the reasoning system, and it's hard to separate out that emotion from the reasoning system. Another example is that we notice evidence that supports the theories that we have, and we don't notice evidence that goes against it. So if you think that the bailout is a good idea, you might easily remember all the examples of things like, the Japanese situation where it was good for there to be a bailout there, and you might not think of counterexamples. People tend to notice the evidence for their theories, but they don't notice the evidence that might go against their theories. And from a scientific perspective, that's very dangerous, and it leads people to overestimate their own beliefs. So we're a species of people where each individual assumes that he or she is always right. And of course, that can't always be true. Like if two people believe in two different deities, they can't both be right. But people get very convinced that their own set of beliefs are right. And I think that's a byproduct of evolution. It's one of the ways in which the mind is kind of kludgy. Like we have this way of reasoning, which is great that we have it at all, but there are a lot of bugs left in the system.